Well, KwaZulu-Natal Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi today will take the stand on the first day of the Madlanga Commission in Pretoria. The Madlanga Commission is set to investigate the extent of the infiltration in the SAPS, Crime Intelligence, National Prosecuting Authority, the State Security Agency, Correctional Services and the judiciary. For more rolling coverage on the Madlanga Commission and what we can expect, let's cross back to Sakina. We've also got Kani Mapanga and Zwayambeche that are there covering it for us. But Sakina, certainly a very big day. What time are we basically expecting this to all kick off at?
Well, good morning, Leanne, and of course, just tying up the final ends here at the Madlanga Commission. But of course, we are expected to get underway. What was the time that we were given, Kenny? 10 a.m. this morning. But of course, the final touches being made. So we will be here to make sure that you don't miss the start of the first day of the Madlanga Commission, which is of course marking a turning point in South Africa's landscape, its political landscape, because the weight of expectation on Justice Madlanga and his team to navigate what is a very complex labyrinth of allegations that have been made, allegations into criminality, into political interference, into corruption in the criminal justice system. All of that needs to be unpacked, and that is no mean feat. But of course, just starting with the political landscape and how this is likely to influence the balance of forces in that regard, Mzwai.
It's going to be quite interesting, especially, Sakina, because part of the evidence will not, you and I won't have the opportunity to listen to it. Of course, the judge and those who are tasked with that responsibility will be able to do that. But given that it is likely really to go beyond what we know in terms of who may be involved or not, so it's likely to be huge. Because if the network is so wide, I think it could touch perhaps individuals who we may never have thought of. And it depends who those people are. If those are perhaps part of the political machinery in the country, definitely some sort of consequences will be expected. And I suspect it may be across the board, because the criminal network ordinarily works with everyone, so they don't pick and choose as long as their interests are served. So that's what happens. But when all that is said and done, it is those, for example, someone like General Mkhwanazi, who has made the allegations. He is one of those people who is now expected to provide some sort of concrete evidence, because this could change the direction, Sakina and Kenny, of the country, depending on what will come out of there.
Indeed, he who alleges must prove. But Kenny, also very important that we need to stress, again, this is a commission that is inquisitorial. Yes. So let's speak to that, and in terms of just the limitations, the boundaries for this particular commission.
Well, there's a lot of advantages that come with having an inquisitorial body serve as the fact-finding mission to test the veracity of the allegations that are being made. It means that any information or evidence that can assist the Commission in doing its work is brought into the Commission to assist in making that final finding. But that presents complications once you want further action to be taken using our state institutions rather that are responsible for such. So if there's a recommendation that this needs to be investigated by the NPA, that's a completely different process. If you see some of these matters heading to court in a few years, that's a completely different process that will follow there. And the threshold, once you leave the Commission of Inquiry, is much higher. Yes, these witnesses will be placed in the witness box and they will have to testify under oath and give their version of events. But the exercise of corroborating evidence and doing the extra investigations that could lead to successful convictions, for an example, that is a much higher threshold. And that is the flaw that you saw with the Zondo Commission, for example. You had the Zondo Commission finish its work and the reports get handed over, and overnight you saw the public expect a number of high-profile arrests and convictions to take place. And we saw a number of those high-profile arrests, but you saw how difficult it is to secure a conviction because the threshold is much higher in a courtroom than it is in a body such as this, which is only tasked with finding the facts, reaching a conclusion, then making recommendations to the president. Also, in this particular matter, you're dealing with an instance where the KZN Top Cop is making allegations that feature quite prominently all of these key state institutions that we rely on to promote the rule of law and ensure that civilians are safe. So when those findings are made, how do you then approach any defects that you find in the NPA possibly, or if you find in SAPS, who are supposed to gather that evidence, provide it in a docket and hand it over to the NPA? If, for example, allegations are made about the judiciary that has its own process in disciplining judges, how then do you trust that particular process to be successful when he has implicated nearly every key role player in our criminal justice system that we rely on civilians to be safe? So it's quite a tricky process that is going to follow here. I think the advantages of an inquisitorial body is that you get more evidence and you get more information and you get more people coming forward. But once it transfers onto the serious, impact and the actions that must follow after you found the facts, that's when the difficulties will arise, and we've seen that with commissions in the past before.
Brings us back to political will, Mzwai, because in as much as those facts can be ventilated and people can come here at great cost, sometimes, a risk to their lives in coming here and giving evidence before this commission and previous commissions, it then comes down to political will because of the non-binding nature of the recommendations that this commission will then hand over to the president, which will then ultimately be handed over to the Speaker of Parliament as well. So the political will, is it there? Because we heard Justice Zondo, bemoaning, lamenting the fact that the commission was done at great cost, financially and otherwise, to the South African public, but how far have we come?
Yeah. Well, from this, obviously we are speaking about this commission, Sakina, but I suspect the members of parliament heeded the message from Judge Zondo. You recall that they were actually not spared, that they didn't do something when they had to, when the allegations came out there. So we see these allegations, and then we see the executive taking action, we see the legislature taking action, obviously the judiciary will be at the center of probing this. So the initial indications are such that perhaps there is some sort of a political will, but here is the question. Once all is out, will that political will be demonstrated? For example, if there are individuals who then are implicated in one way or the other, who don't necessarily need to go to the court processes, but because of the public role they play, so those in power or those in charge, will they act? That's why we'll need to see if the political will is there. The ad hoc committee, for example, in Parliament, what is it? If there are certain things that come out there, will we see some action from that side? So that will be quite interesting. In fact, if this commission is to be different from the rest of others, it will be the action post these hearings, because that will indicate that it was not an exercise in futility.
And to this point, that has proven to be the Achilles heel, really,
yes,
of processes such as these. But then, of course, also the parallel process of the ad hoc committee. And looking at what's going to happen here, generally we expected to see the same witnesses at the Madlanga Commission as we will see at the ad hoc committee as well. So what's your take on that? Just looking at the two processes and how are they likely to differ, Kenny?
Well, I would argue, Sakina, that there are two independent processes. You have a commission of inquiry here, and Parliament has its own duties. You cannot conflate the two or state that because one process is taking place here, that you can't have a parallel process taking place in Parliament, because they serve very different functions. That particular argument, we saw it come up during the Kalapala saga, where Parliament was taken to court for its failure to investigate those allegations, because there were a number of probes taking place in other institutions. But that's not a good enough excuse for Parliament not to perform its functions as national lawmakers with regards to allegations where there is a responsibility to do so. So this is a separate process initiated by the President in terms of the powers afforded to him in the Constitution. They must do their work and present that report to the President. Of course, Parliament has a separate process that they are conducting.
Let me quickly interject there because we need to hand it back to studio in a moment, but I just want to touch on that in terms of the powers of the President and this commission, given that the MK party has now taken to the courts to question some of those powers, I would suggest, and of course also the commission itself and its right to exist and look into the allegations that have been made.
Yes, so when the Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi made those allegations, everyone turned to the President to make some drastic steps regarding some of the high-profile figures that had been fingered in this particular allegations that were made of the alleged infiltration of this organized crime syndicates. Of course, the President has a responsibility to act rationally, and the way in which that was approached was to use his powers in the Constitution to test the allegations that have been made by the Lieutenant General. That is the process that you're seeing happening now, and it is only once those allegations have been tested and a conclusive report has been given to the President that he can then exercise his powers towards those individuals.
It's interesting to see how they will cooperate, particularly with regards to witnesses. We saw what happened with General Mkhwanazi, and Parliament is still adamant they need him to come. But I think we'll deal with it going forward.
Yeah, indeed. All right, so much more to come. And of course, we've got the Commission spokesperson will also speak to us and give us a little bit more in terms of how they are going to respond to that charge by the Umkhonto weSizwe party, among other things. But stay with us. We're going to hand you back to Leanne in studio, and we'll be back later on with more from the Madlanga Commission, Day 1.